to Bad Goodbyes. Each week on our show, we spotlight species from the IUCN Critically Endangered Red List. These are plants and animals with decreasing populations, nearing the edges of extinction. And so we'll share species research, information, and conservation proposals. And we'll spend part of the show opening a space for contemplation and awe. We'll perform a soundscape of gentleness, of reflection, of delight, and perhaps of grieving. Without conservation activity and significant societal shift, many of these species may not survive the 21st century. And so perhaps we might acknowledge their journey with a moment of our attention, a recognition of our kinship, and with a commitment to personal and systemic change. Thank you for listening. On today's show, we consider the Caley's Grevillea. Caley's Grevillea is a critically endangered flowering shrub native to Australia, specifically to the state of New South Wales, north of Sydney, near the Pacific coast. Its scientific name is Grevillea caleyi, and it was first described in 1830. Caley's Grevillea is a medium to tallish spreading shrub that can reach heights of 10 feet and widths of 13 feet. They have very long, wide-spreading branches and an open growth form with a kind of tangled, vine-like appearance. Caley's Grevillea grows unusual leaves. They're large, up to 7 inches in length and 3 inches in width, and each blade is divided into roughly 28 oblong lobes. The blades are so deeply divided that, looking at the plant, one might mistake these lobes for distinct leaves, but they are in fact all divisions of a single leaf. The leaves are recurved, meaning their edges, their margins, are wavy and curled. And they're covered in soft, relatively long, rusty whitish hairs. These are trichomes. Trichomes also cover the plant's branches and stems, looking not so much like a fuzz, but more cobwebby, a bit like the hairs on, say, human arms and legs. The trichomes and the recurved leaf form are adaptations to prevent water loss. Grevillea are often referred to as spider flowers due to their unusual flower clusters, their inflorescences. Caley's Grevillea inflorescences are a 3-inch cluster of a dozen plus individual flowers, growing upright in a secund raceme arrangement, meaning the flowers only grow on one side of the stem. This is sometimes called a toothbrush flower cluster. This is likely an adaptation for bird pollination. Birds can perch on the stem, and the flowers are right there, upright, all on the same side, easy to access their nectar. The flowers themselves do not have traditional petals. Instead, a whorl of 4 pinkish-brown tepals envelop the reproductive organs in a tube-like structure. Protruding from this tube is the style, part of the female reproductive organ. It is 1.5 inches long, deep red and wiry, with a bright green domed tip called a pollen presenter, with the pollen receiving stigma at the pollen presenter's center. The male reproductive organs, the pollen-producing stamen, are in fact fused to the insides of the tepals. So when the flower bud is still closed, before the tepals open, the stamen produces its pollen. Then, upon opening, the long style springs free of the bud, brushing against the stamen, the pollen presenter collecting pollen as it's released. Caley's Grevillea relies on birds, like honeyeaters and wattlebirds, and honeybees for pollen transfer. The flowers are nectar rich, producing high sugar, high energy nectar at the bottom of their flower tube. So when a pollinator visits to feed on the nectar, it brushes against the pollen presenter, pollen sticks to its fur or feathers, and ideally is transferred when the pollinator feeds at a different individual. On successful pollen transfer and fertilization, the Caley's Grevillea develops a small, 3/4 inch long, reddish-brown striped, woody fruit called a follicle. Each follicle contains a single seed. These seeds are tough and durable, adapted for soil seed banking. Caley's Grevillea is what's called an obligate seeder. Here's how this works. Once a fruit matures and dries, while still on the plant, it splits open and drops its seed directly to the ground beneath the parent plant. These seeds are dormant, and over time, due to wind and weather, may be buried in the topsoil. And underground, the seed's dormancy persists until exposure to high heat, bushfire. Research has shown that temperatures between about 140 degrees Fahrenheit and 250 degrees Fahrenheit are needed to break the physical dormancy of the seed coat. So with a short, weak burn that does not raise soil temp above 140, germination is not triggered. But with a long hot burn in which temps exceed 250 degrees, the seed suffers too much heat damage to be viable. So the reproductive success of the Caley's Grevillea relies on fire intensity. And on fire frequency. Caley's Grevillea, the plant itself, is not fire tolerant. It burns. It's killed by fire. So, in ideal circumstances, the previous generation, the parent plants, die off in flames in a fire event, which induces germination of the next generation, these seeds that have been banked in the soil beneath. And these new seedlings grow in soil now rich with nutrients released by the burnt vegetation of their parent plants and free from competition for light. But all of this is complicated by timing, because it takes roughly 5 years for a juvenile Caley's Grevillea to reach reproductive maturity, and roughly another 5 years to build up an appreciable seed bank. So if bushfire sweeps their habitat too frequently, the previous generation dies off without ample seeds banked to replace their numbers. If fire occurs too infrequently, the previous generation may die off from old age, and the banked seeds never germinate and lose viability. So changes in the fire regime, the cycles, frequency, and intensity of bushfire, has a pronounced effect on Caley's Grevillea reproduction. In the dream, to be in the final act, oneself and offering. At the end, a contribution, a commitment to a growing future, a refutation of wealth hoarding, of petty, futile covetousness. There in the flames, I sing, "What I was is now yours. Live." In the dream. The Caley's Grevillea is native to Australia, to the state of New South Wales, at the eastern edge of the continent, to a generally suburban area, about 5 miles from the Pacific coast, and about 10 miles north of Sydney, Australia's most populous city. This is the Sydney Basin bioregion, historically dominated by vegetation growing on nutrient-poor sandstone plateaus near the coastal plains. We specifically find the Caley's Grevillea in only about 3 square miles of the Duffy's Forest Ecological Community. This is an open woodland on the ridges of the Hornsby Plateau, roughly 500 to 800 feet above sea level. Here, the terrain is relatively flat, and the soil is dry, clay, and iron rich, with a textured reddish-brown color. Canopy vegetation grows tall and dense, an overstory of eucalyptus and bloodwood. The midstory is more sparse and open, so light reaches the shrubby understory of Grevillea, Banksia, and Hakea, the ground cover of grasses and small flowers and herbs. The climate is temperate and relatively mild. Summer highs averaging in the low 80s Fahrenheit and winter lows averaging in the 50s Fahrenheit. Annual rainfall averages about 50 inches, distributed fairly evenly across the year. The Caley's Grevillea shares its New South Wales home with thick-tailed gecko, smooth-barked apple, ring-tailed possum, feather-tailed glider, red bloodwood, Jackie lizard, silver-top ash, masked owl, long-nosed bandicoot, devil's twine, hairpin banksia, crinklebush, eastern pygmy possum, swamp wallaby, little wattlebird, lesser flannel flower, rusty velvet bush, sugar glider, Indian pennywort, glossy black cockatoo, myrtle wattle, woody pear, Port Jackson heath, curved rice flower, New Holland honeyeater, diamond python, hooded plover, and many, many more. The primary historic and contemporary threat to the Caley's Grevillea is human habitat destruction. Development in this region began in the mid-1800s with timber clearing and sawmills. And today this is a landscape of highways, gas stations, and golf courses, with fragment pockets of forest. 85% of the Caley's Grevillea habitat has been cleared, with that habitat encroachment accelerating across the 20th century. Relatedly, reduced habitat has led to increased consumption of Grevillea seeds and seedlings by bushrat and swamp wallaby. These small mammals are increasingly concentrated in smaller habitat fragments, leading to increased seed predation and grazing. The Caley's Grevillea seeds, eaten before they can be seed banked in the soil, the seedlings consumed before they reach reproductive maturity. And human impact on the local fire regime challenges Caley's Grevillea's reproduction. In some parts of their habitat, both intentional and unintentional burns are happening too frequently for substantial seed banking. And then in other areas, human suppression of bushfire means banked seeds are not germinating. Additionally, human impacts like trash dumping, recreation like motorized dirt bikes and trail clearing, and human-introduced invasive species continue to threaten the remaining Caley's Grevillea population. Fortunately, Caley's Grevillea is legally protected at the federal and local level, and the New South Wales government has developed an extensive species conservation action plan. The plan includes fire management guidelines to ensure that fire frequency accords with seed germination requirements, includes invasive species eradication, protecting remaining habitat from clearing and disturbance, and ensuring future development does not damage plants or key habitats. Additionally, some individuals are found in the protected wildernesses of Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park and Gargle National Park. The plant's seeds have been conserved off-site in the Australian Plant Bank at the Australian Botanic Garden Mount Annan, and in the Millennium Seed Bank at the Kew Royal Botanic Gardens in the UK. There are off-site propagation programs in place, also at the Mount Annan Gardens, as well as at local nurseries, which are cultivating seedlings to later be replanted in the Grevillea's habitat. A 2025 program is exploring olfactory misinformation to protect the Caley's Grevillea from mammalian feeders. Researchers are trialing the use of odors that mimic the smell of unappealing vegetation on 4 endangered species, including Caley's Grevillea. So, herbivores, like the swamp wallaby, rely on olfaction, sense of smell, to find good food sources. So, researchers are hoping that the application of the scent of poor quality food will deter the wallaby, reducing browsing pressure on the Caley's Grevillea without needing disruptive physical barriers like fencing or the application of toxic pesticides. These trials are ongoing, but early results are promising. Nevertheless, the Caley's Grevillea has been considered critically endangered on the IUCN Red List since 2020, and their population is currently in decline. Our most recent counts estimate that less than 1,000 Caley's Grevillea remain in the wild. Information for today's show about the Caley's Grevillea was compiled from the IUCN. From Ecological Management and Restoration, Volume 5, Number 2. From Australasian Plant Conservation, Journal of the Australian Network for Plant Conservation, Volume 22, Number 1. From Australia's Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water. From Australia's Department of Planning and Environment. From the Australian Plants Society, New South Wales. From the journal Heredity, Volume 92. From the Australian Floral Foundation. From the Australian Journal of Botany, Volume 48, Number 2. From the New South Wales Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water. From the New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Service. From New South Wales Bionet. From Royal Botanic Gardens and Domain Trust. And from Wikipedia. For more information about Caley's Grevillea conservation, please see the New South Wales Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water at environment.nsw.gov.au. So in a moment, I would like to perform some music in hopes of making space to be in contemplation of the other life with whom we share our earth, like the Caley's Grevillea. I do not intend to force meaning upon or extract meaning from the Caley's Grevillea. Instead, I want this music to simply express my awe for all life. So I'll pause in the space of sound and reflection, and I warmly invite you to join me. honor the life force of the Caley's Grevillea. I will commit its name to my record. I am so grateful to have shared time on our planet with this remarkable being. And I lament the ways in which I and my species have harmed and diminished the species. I grieve. So in the name of the Caley's Grevillea, I pledge to reduce my consumption, my carbon footprint, my wastefulness. I pledge to acknowledge and attempt to address the costs of my actions and inactions. And I pledge to resist the harm of plant and animal kin and their habitats by individuals, corporations, and governments. I forever pledge my song to the witness and memory of all life, to a broad celebration of biodiversity, and to the total liberation of all beings. This has been Bad Goodbyes. Thank you for listening. Until next time, let's take care of each other and all of our kin.